The moment Chase froze at the sight of my unit pin, my sister didn't look at him, she looked at me. And in her eyes, I saw something I'd spent my whole life trying not to see. Not confusion, not fear, not even betrayal. Resentment, raw, old, bone-deep resentment. She didn't ask why her fiancé suddenly stood at attention. She didn't wonder why a man who bragged about being a hero could barely breathe. She just whispered, shaking with rage, "You did this, Mia!" And in that moment, before the truth surfaced, before the room fell silent, before everything she built collapsed, I realized something devastating. My sister had been waiting her whole life for a reason to hate me. That was the night everything broke, and the night I finally understood how long the fracture had been there. Colorado Springs has a way of swallowing sound long before it reaches you. Out here, at the foot of the Rockies, the world feels suspended between the whistle of winter wind and the distant rumble of aircraft cutting across a pale sky. Most mornings begin with the same rhythm, the soft crunch of frost under my boots, the wave from the retired man next door, the steady hum of a life that looks calm enough to pass as ordinary. Calm, though, can be deceptive. Stillness has a way of hiding fractures, pressing them deep beneath the routines we cling to. I learned that early, watching my family fall into its familiar pattern, Harper blazing ahead, drawing every eye in the room, and me settling quietly into the shadows she never bothered to notice. No one questioned it. Not her. Not my parents. Not even me. Harper thrived on attention the way other people needed sleep. She spun entire evenings out of her laughter, her stories, her effortless charm. Crowds adored her, strangers trusted her, and the rest of us, we simply made space for her brightness, the way you instinctively step back when someone lights a sparkler too close to your face. This weekend, we were all driving to Wyoming for her engagement celebration with Chase Dalton, the local search and rescue favorite whose name had become her latest badge of pride. Every call, every text from her these past weeks had led back to him, what he'd said, what he'd done, how the town practically treated him like its own mountain legend. When she announced the event, her voice was a mix of excitement and gentle correction, the kind she'd perfected over the years. "Mia, maybe steer clear of talking about your classified stuff. Chase really wants the weekend to feel romantic, not, military." I let it slide off me like I always did. That was my role, after all. Background, steady, predictable. But as I packed for Wyoming, a strange tension settled in my chest, an instinct I had learned never to ignore. It felt like the kind of quiet that comes right before an avalanche, when the mountain holds its breath. Something was waiting for us up there. Something neither Harper nor I was ready to face. Harper talked about Chase the way people talk about a rescue dog they believe was sent from heaven to fix their lives. To her, he wasn't just a man she loved. He was proof she had finally chosen right, finally found someone impressive enough to make the rest of her world clap. The more she praised him, the less it sounded like admiration, and the more it sounded like she was holding him up as a shield. One evening, she called me, twirling in a white dress meant for the engagement weekend. She barely paused before slipping into instructions. "Mia, don't bring any uniform pieces, okay? And definitely no pins. Chase thinks some guests might feel intimidated." I lifted an eyebrow, unsure whether to laugh or sigh. "I'm not exactly out here scaring people." "Harper!" She waved me off with a bright smile. "Chase is the hero in this story. I just don't want anything distracting from that." Her tone was light, practiced, a little too rehearsed. But then she let something slip, something she clearly thought was harmless. Apparently, Chase had joked that people in military desk jobs don't know real danger. The air inside me went still. No one in my family had ever asked what my nights looked like after certain missions. They didn't know the weight of monitoring a team's heartbeat across a satellite map. They didn't know how long silence could stretch when your job was to keep someone alive from hundreds of miles away. They didn't know what it felt like to walk into your home after a 14-hour shift, carrying news you could never repeat out loud. But Harper spoke like danger was some cute badge you earned from camp. as if I'd never been anywhere near it. I ended the call earlier than she expected. The Colorado night pressed cold against the windows, something sharp threading into my chest. This wasn't sisterly teasing anymore. It carried the familiar sting of dismissal wrapped in a joke, something I'd felt my whole life but rarely named. And for the first time, I sensed that this tiny crack between us was about to widen in ways neither of us could control. The day before we were supposed to leave for Wyoming, a coded message pinged my phone ordering me to report to F.E. Warren, no explanation, no pre-brief, just a room number and a time. Those kinds of summons never arrive without wait. I drove through the gates before sunrise, the cold still clinging to the ground. A young airman escorted me past 2 layers of security to a dim briefing room where Major Henderson stood waiting. He slid a velvet box toward me without ceremony, the way people handle objects that matter more than they want to admit. You'll wear this for the next 5 days. No removal, no explanations. Inside was a small black metal pin etched with a symbol I recognized instantly. My breath tightened before I could stop it. This wasn't a unit pin anyone displayed lightly. It belonged to a joint operation that remained unspoken for many reasons. Because of the terrain, because of the casualties narrowly avoided, because of the mistakes that nearly cost much more. I had supported that mission from the shadows, tracing wind patterns, mapping unstable ground, guiding a team through conditions where one wrong decision would have rewritten several families' futures. A passing airman caught sight of the pin and stood straighter than protocol required. "Ma'am, haven't seen that one outside theater in a long time." His tone wasn't curiosity, it was recognition. Something in my stomach turned. Someone out there would know exactly what this pin meant and exactly what it connected me to. But questions were dangerous currency in my line of work, so I simply clipped the pin onto my civilian jacket, feeling the cold metal settle against my chest like the steady thump of another heartbeat. As I walked out of the base, I had no idea that this single, silent object would be the spark that tore open everything in Wyoming: my sister's engagement, Chase's carefully built image, and the fragile balance our family had held for years. I reached Wyoming in the late afternoon, the Tetons glowing in a thin layer of silver as the sun slipped low behind them. The lodge Harper had chosen looked like something out of a winter magazine spread, warm light pooling through wood beams, the kind of place where people believed love could only thrive. Yet the moment I stepped out of my car, something in my chest tightened, a quiet instinct humming beneath the calm. Harper rushed out, wrapped me in a familiar embrace, and immediately tugged at my jacket, urging me to change before anyone saw. We fell into our usual rhythm of pretending everything was fine, even as that invisible distance stretched between us. Inside, laughter filled the lodge. Chase stood in the middle of a crowd, telling rescue stories with the ease of a man who expected admiration. I slipped to the edge of the room, my arms folded, watching like an outsider observing a play. Then the first fracture appeared. Chase launched into a dramatic account of the Granite Creek slide, claiming he'd coordinated the entire mission alone. I remembered the real report, how a misstep nearly cost a service member his life, and how a joint unit had to intervene. I couldn't say a word. Classified details have a way of sealing your lips even when you want to speak. He later tossed a casual jab my way, suggesting I probably only saw danger through screens. The room laughed, Harper the loudest. I didn't react, but a sharp, familiar sting carved itself deeper inside me. It worsened when one of his friends encouraged him to tell the part about how the military hadn't helped much. They all laughed again. My heart pounded. None of them knew I'd monitored every shift of that mountain slope. None knew one man survived because of decisions made in silence, far from any spotlight. And when Harper met my eyes with a soft, almost triumphant smile, I understood something irreversible. We weren't just different. We were living in 2 separate worlds, one grounded in truth, the other built on illusions she desperately needed. I stepped onto the balcony, the cold wind cutting through me. Beneath the noise inside, I could almost hear the first crack of something preparing to break. The next morning felt deceptively serene, sun slipping over the valley, thin mist covering the ground. Harper stayed busy preparing for the engagement dinner, and I helped the way I always had. Quietly, steadily, fading into the background. But calm never lasts. While lifting a crate of flowers, Harper made a remark that sliced deeper than she knew. She insisted Chase faced real danger, the kind she believed I could never understand. She said it lightly, but it hit with the force of a blow. She didn't know about the midnight casualty calls, the nights I'd barely held myself together after a single miscalculation, or the last transmissions I'd once relayed through static. Before I could say anything, I caught Chase watching me. His eyes were locked onto the unit pin that had slipped slightly into view. I hit it again, but the fear in his face lingered, a flicker of recognition he couldn't mask. Later, in the kitchen, I overheard guests whisper about how Chase had never fully explained Granite Creek, hinting at military involvement he glossed over. They looked in my direction without knowing why. The past he tried to bury was pushing back to the surface. That night, while arranging the seating chart, Harper placed me at the end of the table near the exit, calling it convenient. I laughed faintly, but something brittle cracked inside me. It wasn't the seat, it was the position she gave me in her life. I stepped outside again, wind slapping hard across my face. My hand drifted to the hidden pin. In just a few hours, it would blow everything open. Snow dusted the lodge roof that evening, thin and white like a sheet draped over something waiting to be revealed. Inside, Harper moved with frantic precision, fixing candle angles, smoothing linens, rehearsing perfection with every step. In her mind, this was the night everyone would see Chase the way she wanted him seen. The man she believed towered above the rest. I stepped into the hall, still in my service coat from a last-minute call I couldn't ignore. The unit pin glinted faintly on my lapel. Harper spotted it instantly, her face tightening. "Mia, I asked you not to bring anything military tonight." I kept my voice even. "I'm on standby. I don't get to choose." She whispered sharply that I always ruined her spotlight, but before I could respond, the shift in the room happened. Chase raised a glass for a toast, smiling easily, until his gaze fell to the pin. Every muscle in his face froze. He stepped back, breath caught, nearly dropping his drink. The room fell into a confused quiet, but I recognized the expression. It was the look of a man confronted with a past he'd hoped was buried. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked. "Ma'am!" Conversation died. Harper stared at him, then at me, disbelief splintering across her features. Chase couldn't drag his eyes from the pin. It wasn't respect. It was fear. Then, from the corner, a man in a mountain flannel stood abruptly, eyes locking onto the insignia. He straightened into a crisp salute. "Ma'am!" The lodge went silent. Harper stammered, demanding to know how he knew me. The man replied he'd worked near a unit that carried that pin and never expected to see it outside a theater. It was as if he'd announced an explosion. Chase's face drained. "Harper, I need to talk to you, alone." She refused, her voice rising, demanding answers. He swallowed hard and confessed the part he'd always avoided. "Granite Creek. I wasn't honest. I didn't handle it right. A military team had to intervene, and Mia's pin, it belongs to them." Harper broke into tears. His carefully built image cracked open in front of everyone, and I knew nothing would be the same. The warmth in the lodge vanished, replaced by a cold sharper than the wind outside. Chase set his glass down, hands trembling, still staring at the pin as though it held power over him. I stayed silent, not because I lacked words, but because my silence was required. Harper misread it instantly. Chase admitted he'd exaggerated, that mistakes were made, that others had saved lives he claimed as his victories. Harper's voice shook as she asked whether he wasn't the hero she'd believed in. He said nothing, and that silence was its own confession. Her humiliation swung toward me. "What did you do? Did you wear that to destroy everything?" I answered steadily. "I didn't do anything to you." She erupted, yelling that I always made her smaller, always ruined her moments. I cut in quietly. "Harper, I've been silent my whole life." The lodge stilled. Surprisingly, Chase stepped forward. She doesn't need to ruin anything. She's part of a unit I'm not worthy to stand beside. A ranger approached, resting a hand on my shoulder, telling Harper that people wearing this pin weren't seeking spotlight. They were the ones others depended on to survive it. Harper crumpled. Chase lowered his head, and I realized there was nothing left for me to fix. So I walked out into the snow, choosing myself for the first time. I walked out of the lodge into the freezing Wyoming night, the cold cutting through my coat as if it meant to remind me I was finally alone. No one followed. No one called my name. And strangely, the emptiness felt liberating, a clean, sharp breath after years of holding everything in. Driving down the mountain, snow catching in my headlights. My phone lit up nonstop. First Harper, then Chase, then my mother, then Harper again. I let every call ring out. Her texts followed in a flood, begging me to come back, accusing me of humiliating her, finally lashing out that I always had to be better than everyone. I powered the phone off. A single voicemail slipped through. Chase's voice shook as he admitted Granite Creek wasn't what he'd claimed, that he knew exactly what the pin meant, and what I'd done that day. The message cut off abruptly, as if courage had run out mid-sentence. Then the bass called, instructing me to keep the pin on and say nothing to anyone. I glanced back toward the dark lodge, feeling the weight of everything collapsing at once. Minutes later, Harper called from a different number. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Mia, I hate you, but I hate myself more." And the line went dead. 2 days after the engagement imploded, Harper appeared at my door in Colorado Springs. She didn't bother with makeup, hair, or the kind of dress she used to wear like armor. Her shoulders were slumped, her eyes were raw, and for the first time in years, she wasn't performing for anyone. She looked like a person who had finally run out of places to hide. I opened the door without speaking. She stepped inside quietly, standing in the center of my living room, as if she wasn't sure she deserved the space she occupied. It took only a breath before everything spilled out. She admitted she had always known I was stronger, steadier, the one who didn't need applause to feel real. She confessed that living next to that had made her feel small, and she'd spent years trying to outrun that feeling. Choosing Chase, she said, wasn't about love. It was about finding someone who made her feel like she finally measured up. And when my presence alone caused his entire facade to collapse, it shattered something in her too. Then she said the words she'd been afraid to say for 20 years. She resented me because I didn't need an audience to exist, while she felt like she disappeared the moment no one was watching. I told her gently but firmly that building a life around borrowed light wasn't living, and it wasn't something I could rescue her from. She nodded, blinking back tears, saying she didn't want saving anymore. She wanted to rebuild herself from the ground up. Her apology came next, without excuses. She admitted she had made me smaller, just to feel bigger beside me. And for the first time, stripped of everything she used to shine with, she finally looked honest. I told her I'd always been here, just finally standing in the right place. 3 months passed, and the distance between who Harper used to be and who she was becoming felt almost impossible to measure. The transformation didn't happen in a burst of revelation. It happened in the slow, steady work she finally chose for herself. Therapy every Tuesday afternoon, long walks instead of long rants, a new job that didn't ask her to perform, impress, or outshine, just to show up and be present. For the first time, she wasn't chasing admiration. She was learning how to stand on her own feet without needing an audience to applaud every step. My life shifted too. I accepted a new assignment in Washington, D.C. A quiet acknowledgement from the people who knew my work, understood its weight, and didn't need it decorated with public praise. It felt right, like stepping into a chapter I'd earned long before anyone noticed. On the morning of my flight, Harper met me at the airport. She looked different, not in clothing or makeup, but in the calmness radiating from her. There was no frantic energy, no forced brightness, just sincerity. She hugged me tightly and handed me a small velvet box. Inside was a silver bracelet engraved with the words, "For the sister who never needed the spotlight to shine." The metal felt warm against my palm. I told her she was stronger than she'd ever allowed herself to believe. Her smile was soft, unguarded. "You too, Mia. I just needed time to see it." We stood there for a moment, two women who had finally stopped standing in each other's shadows. When I walked through security, bracelet tucked into my jacket pocket, I carried with me a truth I hadn't understood until now. Not every relationship is saved by self-sacrifice. Some are saved by boundaries, some by honesty, some by finally letting the old story die so a better one can grow. As the plane lifted, the fading outline of the Rockies glowed under the afternoon sun, the same mountains where everything between us had broken, and where, somehow, we both found the strength to rebuild, 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 strength to rebuild,